You need to understand something about RAM, and what you need to understand is that RAM is called a volatile memory.
If you work with computers, you've likely heard terms like RAM, hard drive, and processor mentioned by tech support or others who are more interested in what goes on inside of a computer's case. If you've always wondered what the various components of your computer are for, but have never really had the time to look into it, then this video is just for you. While each one of these components is complex enough to spend a lifetime learning about, I'm going to give a very broad and general overview. A typical desktop computer comes down to these 7 essential parts: case, power supply, motherboard, CPU, RAM, hard drive, and graphics cards. These are the fundamental parts of any desktop computer. It may seem daunting at first, so let's separate these into 2 categories: simple ones and the more complex ones. For starters, let's look at the case. The case is nothing more than a big hunk of plastic that houses everything else. Some of them have more or less physical space, some of them have different parts where you can put screws in or this or that, but at the end of the day, all the case really does is provide a nice enclosed system for everything else. Next up, we have the power supply. This part of your computer, almost always located on the bottom, is the part that plugs into the wall and provides all of the other parts with the electricity needed to do their thing. You can think of it as an extremely advanced AC adapter. The last of the simple parts to mention is the motherboard. The motherboard is a wide and flat circuit board that all of the other components plug into. It's the part that lets all of these components send electrical currents, composing data, between each other. While not particularly expensive, the motherboard is arguably the most important component because without it, you'd have nowhere to put anything else. So that's it for the simple components. Now let's move on to the more complex parts, the ones that deal with data. The 4 main components to keep in mind here are CPU, RAM, hard drive, and graphics card. Now first things first, I'm going to establish some terminology. Keep in mind that CPU is also known as the Central Processing Unit, or processor. These terms all refer to the same thing. They're completely interchangeable. RAM stands for Random Access Memory and is often referred to as just memory. A hard drive is often referred to as a disk drive or storage. And a graphics card is also known as a GPU or graphics processing unit. For this explanation, I'll be using the terms CPU, RAM, hard drive, and graphics card. So let's start with the CPU. The CPU is where your computer does things. It isn't really capable of storing very much data at all, but it's very good at doing things with data. Quickly reading it, arranging it, doing the type of quick and massive calculations needed to run your programs. This is where most of your programs are essentially run from. It's often referred to as the brain of the computer. It's the center part of your computer's brain. Basically, everything that happens in your computer goes through your CPU at some point. Now let's talk about RAM and hard drive at the same time, because they have a very unique relationship, which is probably why people often confuse the two. Your hard drive is where all of your data is stored. When your computer tells you you're running low on space, it's because your hard drive is almost full. All of the data that makes up your videos, pictures, documents, project files, or the 3D worlds and models that make up a game are all stored here. While hard drives can store lots of data, they're relatively bad at accessing that data quickly. Everything is accessed through a tiny little wire here, and because most hard drives are made up of spinning disks, your hard drive isn't going to be able to constantly give your CPU the information it needs to run certain programs. That's where RAM comes in. RAM is another form of storage. It stores the exact same kind of data as your hard drive, but RAM sacrifices storage space for nearly instant accessibility. Unlike your hard drive, which sends all of its data through a tiny little thin wire, your RAM is arranged in these long, thin sticks that insert into your motherboard. Think about a storage unit. If you have a massive warehouse with only a thin doorway, it's going to be difficult to get in, find what you need, and get out if it's kind of spread all over the place. You'll have to go through a tiny door. But if you have a long, wide storage shed that's got a big, massive garage composing an entire side of it, you won't be able to store as much, but things are significantly easier to get to. Typically, if your computer has 1,000 gigabytes of storage space in your hard drive, it's likely got about 16 gigabytes worth of RAM. Here's where you put the stuff you own but you aren't currently using, and this smaller one is where you put the stuff that you are using and need to be able to get in and out of quickly. When you run a program or a project file, your CPU identifies what parts of data are needed for that program to run. It pulls them from your hard drive, and then it stores them in your RAM sticks for quick accessibility. This is why when you start a new level of a game, for instance, it has to load. Anytime you see loading, it's loading the data that composes that level from your bulky hard drive into your RAM. From a user's perspective, just follow this rule of thumb. RAM allows you to run intensive programs, while disk space allows you to have more of these programs installed. It also allows you to have more of the data they're referencing, whether it be pictures, videos, or mods. And finally, we get to the graphics card. With all of the calculations going on in your computer to turn a bunch of numbers that basically come down to ones and zeros into a constantly updated three-dimensional world, the final and most important and arguably most difficult step is to display that on your monitor. It's possible for your motherboard to do this alone, but it's not going to look good, and it's certainly not going to be able to do much. Your graphics card is essentially an entire computer in and of itself, dedicated to the sole task of figuring out what pixels need to light up on your screen, in what color, and at what time. If you were playing a game that had a very busy and high texture world with lots of models and different angles and colors, your CPU is the thing that creates that world. It knows where the stuff is, and it does so with data that's been stored in your RAM, which was loaded out of your hard drive, but it's your graphics card that figures out what it's supposed to look like based on where you're standing in the world. Without getting too off topic here, if you're somebody who likes math, I highly recommend you look up fast inverse square root, which is directly related to how three-dimensional worlds calculate perspectives. So that pretty much sums it up. There are other components worth mentioning, such as cooling systems or internal wireless cards, but really those are extras. So to summarize what I talked about so far, the case stores everything in a physical box, the power supply gives electricity to what needs it, the motherboard is the body that everything plugs into, the CPU does everything, RAM stores data that is needed for quick access, hard drives store everything that you have installed and the data that goes along with those programs, while the graphics card figures out how it's all supposed to look on your monitor. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope I helped, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and I'll do my best to answer them.
Alright, thank you all for coming back to class. Today we want to continue with our studies on computer hardware. Now let's talk about the RAM. RAM stands for Random Access Memory. Now when you hear memory, what comes to mind? Storage, right? When you hear memory, what comes to mind is storage. So over here it says that RAM is a storage device, period. RAM is what? Good. So when you see RAM, don't think of it as any other strange thing. Just think of it as a storage device. Do you know what else is a storage device? Your hard drive is a storage device. Your pen drive is a storage device. Have you seen a pen drive before? Have you opened a pen drive before? The plastic ones, if you break one of them and you remove one, you can see that it looks just like RAM, and it is just inside a plastic that is designed in a nice way, and it's having the USB connector on it. But RAM, the pen drive looks like this. So your RAM is a storage device, and it stands for what? Random Access Memory. Sometimes it is simply referred to as memory. Do you get it? Sometimes it is simply referred to as memory. Now, RAM is the main memory or primary memory in a computer. We can also say that RAM is the main storage or primary storage in a computer. It is where computer stores the operating system, all running programs and data, when the computer is in use, so that they can be quickly reached by the CPU. Excellent. Please, are you here? You need to understand something about RAM. And what you need to understand is that RAM is called a volatile memory. A volatile memory. Please, are you here? It is called volatile because it cannot hold data without electricity. It needs electricity to be able to hold data. Are you with me? That is why it is called volatile. Now watch this. The function of the RAM is to store data and various computing processes so that the CPU can access it very quickly while the computer is running. I like that. I'll come back to this. RAM is a volatile memory, which means it requires power to keep the data accessible, and if the computer is turned off, all data contained in the RAM will be what? Lost. RAM allows the computer to run fast, which means the greater RAM capacity, the faster the computer. This is the second thing it does for your computer. The more RAM space you have, the more free and fast your computer is. RAM does not determine the speed of your computer. It is the CPU that determines the speed. But if the RAM space is not enough, no matter the CPU you have, your computer will still be slow. Okay, watch this. It says that RAM is volatile, which means it needs power to keep your data accessible. And when the computer goes off, all the data on the RAM, what happens to the data? Will be lost, right? All the data on your RAM will be lost. Please, are you here? When the computer is not running, there is nothing on the RAM. RAM cannot store anything when the computer is off or when the RAM is removed. Whenever RAM is removed or the computer is turned off, everything on the RAM is gone. Everything on the RAM is what? There's nothing on the RAM. That is why it is called a volatile memory. Your pen drive, do you still have your data on your pen drive? If you remove your pen drive from the computer, will the data still be on it? The data will still be on it. You can send it to a different computer. You can even travel with it, and you can still get your data, right? RAM doesn't work that way. What you need to understand is that this one only works, I'm going to highlight something. Only works, what have I highlighted? Keep that in mind, because if you forget that, you will never understand this. This one, RAM. It only works while the computer is what? It only works while the computer is what? Let me highlight it from here. What have I highlighted? RAM only works when the computer is what? In use. Keep that in mind. Now, when the computer is in use, every program that is running, including the operating system, is loaded onto the RAM. First of all, your operating system is loaded onto your RAM. All the programs you have opened, they are all loaded onto your RAM. And any processing the CPU is doing, the data it needs for that is loaded onto the RAM. So RAM is what carries all storage when the computer is in use. When you want to create a document and you open to a program like Microsoft Word, the document you are creating is in your RAM. While the computer is on, the document is in your RAM. If the computer goes off, your document will be lost unless you save the document. Have you heard of saving? Saving means moving it from the RAM onto the hard drive. So when you are saving, you save onto the hard drive, or you save a copy on the hard drive. But when the computer is on, everything going on is stored on the RAM. Everything going on is stored where? That is where everything is stored. That is why it is called the main memory, the primary memory. Another reason is that RAM is more than 100 times faster than the hard drive. Even though the hard drive has a big capacity, it is slow. And so the CPU cannot work with the hard drive to get access to all the data it needs, because the CPU is super fast. Remember, 2 gigahertz. Hard drive is very slow, not as slow as you think, but compared to the CPU, very slow. RAM, even though it is not as fast as CPU, it is very fast. So much faster than the hard drive. Are you with me? It is so much faster than the hard drive, and so much faster even than SSD drives. And so the CPU works with the RAM because of its speed. That means when the CPU needs data, RAM can provide quickly. Hard drive will delay the CPU. You know, the CPU is very, very fast, right? So if it needs data, it needs to get it fast. So RAM is used because it works very fast. Now watch this. So that they can be quickly reached by the CPU. It is called random access because, unlike hard drives, any data stored in RAM can be accessed directly without scanning the drive from beginning to end. Due to this, it is much faster to read from and write data to than other kinds of storage devices. Because it is random access, it is much easier to store data on it and to read data from it than other storage devices. So your RAM is what stores everything that is running on a computer when the computer is in use. Every single thing running on the computer is loaded onto the RAM. Have you ever heard the word loading? Have you ever heard loading? When you hear loading, it means data is being moved from hard drive to RAM. Before you open any program or you use any program on your computer, the program needs to be loaded from the hard drive onto the RAM before it will start. So when we hear loading, it means it is being loaded from hard drive to the RAM. Again, the RAM is what stores all programs and all data when the computer is in use. It works directly with the CPU and provides the CPU with any data it needs and stores any data the CPU wants to store when the computer is in use. Without the RAM, your computer can never work. It is a very, very important component. It is so important and so fast. That is why it runs through the NOV bridge, just like the CPU. I hope you remember that. Alright, let's continue reading. It is important to note that data stored in RAM cannot be permanent. Every data stored in RAM is automatically erased immediately the computer is what? Turned off. This is why RAM is known as volatile memory. It is important to save your work when using your computer so that your data can be moved from the RAM to the hard drive for permanent storage. Watch this. Now it says that RAM comes in a variety of what? Generations, such as a DDR, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4, and now DDR5 has been announced. Now, you may not understand what this DDR stands for, but it stands for double data rate. It simply means the versions, let me call them versions. Okay, today the most powerful RAM is the DDR4. Let's put it that way. Let's assume we have some cars called DDR, and the first car that was released was the DDR. The next version that was released was the DDR what? The DDR2, and the DDR2 was more powerful than the DDR. Then the DDR3 came, and the DDR4 came, and the DDR5 is about to come. Something like that. Do you understand? Okay, so the DDR is a generation or the versions of RAM, and it stands for double data rate, and it stands for how fast the RAM is and how modern it is. Watch this. Every computer has the type of RAM it supports. Keep this in mind. Every computer has the type of RAM what it supports. You cannot insert a DDR3 RAM into a computer that supports DDR2. That means if a computer supports DDR2, you can't put DDR3 in it. If a computer supports DDR3, can you put DDR2 in it? It's not going to work. If a computer supports DDR2, can you put DDR4 in it? Okay. So anytime you pick RAM, the first question we will ask, what is the DDR version? Is it DDR2 or DDR3 or DDR4? That's what you need to ask. Because if you don't ask that question and you just pick the RAM and you think it will work in your computer, it's not going to work. If you have a computer, you need to know which DDR it supports. Does my machine support DDR2 or DDR3 or DDR4? Do you understand? Okay. There are several ways of finding out which DDR your computer supports. One of them is by studying the notches. It's by studying what? Every RAM has a hole in the middle somewhere. Every RAM has a hole in the middle somewhere. Did you get me? The hole here is called a notch. And this notch, the position of the notch determines the type of RAM DDR version it is. Because for each one of them, they have changed the position of the notch in a way that even if you want to force it into the RAM, it's not going to work. Are you with me? Are you with me? Because inside what we call a RAM slot, we have some barriers in the middle of RAM slot. Can you see something in the middle here? This is where the notch needs to come and fit in. It's like a barrier. If the hole doesn't fit in that barrier exactly, it can't enter into it. That place is blocked. It is only that hole that can fit into it well. Are you with me? So they have designed it that way to prevent you from placing the wrong RAM in the wrong motherboard. So over here, do you see something here? Good. If this motherboard supports DDR3, this barrier here will be placed at the right place so that a DDR3 RAM can be inserted into it. Because if this motherboard is DDR3, this is exactly where the notch is. It is not somewhere here or here. If you bring the wrong RAM, this thing will not be able to fit into the hole. And even if you try forcing it, it's not going to go in. Are you with me? Are you sure you are following? Even if you force it, it's not going to go in. Alright. So that is one way you can identify the type of RAM you are using. The DDR has its notch here. DDR2 has its notch somewhere here. DDR3 has its notch somewhere here. DDR4 has its notch somewhere here. Some of them look quite similar, but they are not similar at all. Now, RAM has capacity. Every RAM has what? Capacity. The capacity talks about the size or the space on the RAM. The average PC needs at least 4 GB of RAM to work. The average PC needs at least what? 4 GB of RAM to work. The average PC needs at least 4 GB to work. So if you have a PC and your RAM is less than 4 GB, it means your PC is going to be slow. Whether you use a desktop or laptop, make sure your RAM is at least 4 GB. If you have 4 GB or more, you are going to enjoy your PC. Is that okay? Alright. If you want to upgrade your RAM, you can upgrade it to 6 GB or 8 GB or 16 GB. For your PC. If you have a PC, you can upgrade your RAM into from 4 GB to 6 GB to 8 GB or 16 GB. Having more space allows your computer to do what? Run faster. And having less RAM space makes your computer very what? Slow or frozen. So if you have RAM less than 4 GB, you are going to experience a lot of freezing. Is that okay? So if you have a PC and you want to enjoy it, you need to have your RAM more than 4. You should have 6, 8, 16. And if you use your computer for high level work like 3D graphic design and video editing, you need to move your RAM to somewhere like what? 32 GB. If you are not using your PC for advanced work like that, then you don't need up to 32 because 16 is enough. But if you are using your machine for advanced works, then you need 32 gig. 16 will also work, but 32 gig will give you the extra freedom you need. Is that okay? To check your RAM, you can simply go to your desktop, find this icon here. This icon, what does it say? This one. This PC. Right click on this PC and select what? Properties. When you select the properties, it's going to show you the properties of your processor, the properties of your installed RAM. What do you see here? 8 what? So 8 GB. So this tells you that you have 8 GB in your machine. If your RAM is not 8 and it is 2, it means you need to do something about it. If you look on the motherboard, you will realize that we have several RAM slots. If you look on the motherboard, you realize that we have several RAM slots, right? When you look at this particular picture, how many RAM slots do you see? How many do you see here? There are 4. There are 4. You can count these things here. How many do you count here? These are the lockers. How many? There are 4. So there are 4. You can count from here to 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4, right? There are 4 RAM slots here. That means if you have a computer like this, you have the ability to use 4 different RAM modules or RAM sticks to insert in your machine. Now, each one can be 8 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes. If I have 8 gigabytes for each stick and I insert 4, how many will I get? 32. If I have 4 gig for each stick and I insert 4, what will I get? 16. If I have 2 gig for each stick and I insert 4 of them, how many will I get? 8. Okay. It doesn't mean you have to fill all the 4 slots. Sometimes you just be using 1. Let's say you have 8 gig stick, you may be using just 1. All right. Let me talk about the color coding of the RAM slots. You see that this RAM slot has a different color from this. Okay, that means that the 2 here are compatible with each other and the 2 here are more compatible with each other. So if you have 2 RAM sticks, don't put 1 here and 1 here. If you have 2 RAM modules, put all the 2 in a single color code, because the color codes here are designed to work together more faster. If you put 1 here and you put 1 here, you will lose some efficiency. Are you with me? So insert all the 2 in a single color code. Some of them you see that they are in blue, some of them in yellow, some of them in different colors. Are you with me? If you have 2 RAM slots and you place 1 here, where are you supposed to place the second one? Where are you supposed to fix the next one? In the yellow slot, right? Don't place 1 in the yellow and place 1 in the orange slot. It's wrong. You place 1 here, 1 here. But if you have 4 or 3, then you have no choice. You need to cross over and place it in the others. Is that okay? All right. We've learned that having more RAM space allows your computer to run faster. Having less RAM space makes your computer very slow. Now, my question is, why does having more RAM space make your computer faster, and why does having less RAM space make your computer slower? If you can answer me, then we can move on and bring our lesson to a close. Who can tell me why? I want the real reason. I've said it, but I want to be sure you understand. Yes. Having more RAM space allows your computer to run faster. Having less RAM space makes your computer very slow or frozen. Why? Because when a computer is running, everything that is running on the computer is loaded into the RAM. If the RAM space is not enough, there will be no more space for other programs to be added. And when your computer is being used and there's no more space on your RAM, it becomes slow. Let me put it this way. When you on the computer, every program that is running is brought onto the RAM. It's like they keep on piling it on the RAM. If the RAM is not having enough space, it's like the RAM is not able to carry all the load, and so it moves slowly. It moves slowly. But if your RAM has more space, what it means is that no matter what is running, the RAM is able to carry it and still have more room for more. The thing is that when the space on the RAM gets full, the CPU finds it difficult to store more data, because whatever the CPU wants to store, it needs to store on the RAM. When the RAM is about to be full, it becomes difficult, so your machine runs slow and sometimes freezes. That is what happens. So the reason is that all running programs are loaded onto the RAM, and if the RAM doesn't have more space, it will not be able to load more. Now, when the space becomes completely full and you want to open another program, it's not going to work at all. Sometimes you have to close some programs before you can open other programs. Closing programs means you are taking off some load from the RAM. So if you don't have enough RAM, sometimes you need to take off some load before you can open another. When I say open, what do I mean? If I run a program, let's say I open to a program like CorelDRAW. The CorelDRAW I'm opening will be loaded onto the RAM. So if I have, let's say, Photoshop open already and I want to open to CorelDRAW, the two of them will find it difficult to stay on the computer. So the CorelDRAW will be so slow, will freeze the machine. But if I close the Photoshop first, I can easily open to the CorelDRAW. Again, RAM is not what determines the speed of your computer. The speed is determined by the what? CPU. But if the RAM is small, no matter the CPU you have, your computer will still be slow, because everything running on the computer is loaded on the RAM. Listen to me. No matter how powerful your CPU is, if your RAM is small, your computer will still be slow. The reason is that everything running on the computer is loaded onto the RAM. If the RAM is not able to carry the load, the computer will be slow. Imagine you have a very, very powerful car and a very, very poor road. If you have a powerful car and the road is very, very poor, can the car go fast? Oh, tell me the truth. Can the car run fast? The car is very powerful, but the road is very bad. Will it be slow? That is how it is. So the RAM does not determine the speed, but if you don't have enough space, your machine will still be slow. If you have enough space, your machine will be fast if your CPU is fast. If you have a powerful car and a good road, will it be fast? Your car will be fast. So it's like having good CPU and enough space on your RAM. Sometimes even if the road is good, but the road is small and there's traffic. When there's traffic, can you move fast? Have you ever been in traffic before? Okay, so it's like being in traffic. If you don't have enough RAM space, it's like all the programs will be piled together and there'll be traffic. But if there's enough space on the RAM, it's like a free road, so the cars will move faster. Is that okay? Alright, so I'm going to play one short clip, and after watching that, we'll close for today and meet again on Wednesday.
Let's talk about hard drives and RAM. These are two very important components inside of a computer that are often confused with one another. So let's see if we can clarify the difference and understand the purpose of each one. To start in very general terms, hard drives let your computer hold more stuff. Things like music, photos, videos, applications, etc. RAM, on the other hand, basically just makes your computer go faster. That's the simple version. To understand in a bit more detail, let's use an analogy. Let's say your computer is a workshop, and the CPU, which is the central processing unit, is the woodworker. To do any kind of work, he's going to need tools and supplies, and he's going to need some shelves to store all these tools and supplies. The shelves in a computer are like the hard drive. They provide lots of space to hold all sorts of items that he's going to want to use. In order to use them, though, he has to take them off of the shelf, and he needs a place to put them, where they'll be right at his fingertips for easy access and immediate use. He needs a workbench. This workbench, in the case of a computer, is RAM, which stands for Random Access Memory. It provides a temporary place to store data while the CPU is working on it. So whenever you're working on something on a computer, whether it's editing a text document in a word processor or touching up a photo in an image editor, that item is first loaded into RAM. It's the computer's workbench. If your computer doesn't have very much RAM, it's like having a very small workbench. If this is the case, it really doesn't matter how skilled the worker is, he won't be able to work very quickly because he'll constantly be making trips back and forth from the shelves to get the items he needs to work. On the other hand, if your computer has a lot of RAM, it's like having a great big workbench. The worker can put everything he needs on it and won't have to make any trips to the shelf. It's important to know that items cannot be permanently stored in RAM. In fact, RAM is wiped clean as soon as the computer is turned off, so that's why it's important to save your documents, which is the equivalent of taking them from the workbench and putting them back on the shelves for storage. Now, the amount of RAM you will need to work efficiently depends on the type of work that you're doing. If you're mostly just using a word processor, you don't need a whole lot of RAM. But if you're editing large images or editing high-resolution video, you'll need quite a bit of RAM in order to work efficiently. Let's take a quick look now at some specific amounts of RAM and hard drive capacity so that you have an idea of what is a little, what is a lot, and how this has changed over time. If we look back to the mid-1990s, a typical computer had, on average, about 1 gigabyte of hard drive space and about 8 megabytes of RAM. 20 years later, those numbers had grown roughly 1,000-fold. So a typical computer in 2015 included about 1 terabyte of hard drive space and about 8 gigabytes of RAM. On top of that, the power of a typical CPU, which is the main processor chip in a computer, had also increased by about 1,000-fold. Interestingly, one area that hasn't increased by such a great margin is the speed of hard drives. Even though their storage has increased by 1,000-fold, they can only read and write data about 30 times faster today than they could 20 years ago. It's actually this slow read and write speed of hard drives that most handicaps the performance of modern computers. Fortunately, there's a new technology that has emerged as a replacement for hard drives. It's called a solid-state drive, often abbreviated as SSD. It's called solid-state because, unlike a hard drive, it has no moving parts. These solid-state drives are able to read and write data about 10 times faster than hard drives. So replacing your hard drive with an SSD will give your computer a massive performance boost. That concludes this video. I hope you've enjoyed it and that you have a better understanding of hard drives, SSDs, and RAM.